Okay, so my talk today is titled Workers Saving Jobs and Businesses in Times of Crisis, Lessons from Italy's Worker Buyouts, Legge Marcora Worker Buyouts. And I will spend a little bit of time also talking about Argentina's Worker-Recuperated companies. Okay, so the overview, what I'll talk about today are the conversion of companies overall, so definitions, types, and such. Then I'll spend some time most of the time talking about Italy and the worker buyouts in Italy, which I call negotiated conversions, and I will explain this. In Argentina, the empresas recuperadas, so worker-recuperated enterprises, are labor conflict conversions, so they're slightly different. And I will talk about that towards the end. And then lessons for action. What can we learn from Italy's worker buyouts and Argentina's worker-recuperated enterprises? So let's spend a little bit of time with definitions, types of conversions, and where they are located. Okay? Before that, I just want to start with this. And I am a student of German philosopher Herbert Marcuse. I'm also a critical theorist, as well as sociologist of work. And Herbert Marcuse said that crises are moments of potentiality, of openings for another reality. And in this recent crisis, Naomi Klein has recently stated that crisis blows open the sense of what is possible. And in many ways, this is what workers that take over workplaces are seizing on. So I just wanted to open up with that. We can look at workplace democracy along a continuum or a set of a dimension. So on the one hand, we all participate when we work in any workplace, even the most capitalist workplace. We participate a little more when we contribute feedback into the feedback box, right? The little feedback to the managers. And along this continuum, we have several strategies and ways of participating that have been taken up by workers and by capitalist workplaces as well. On the extreme end, we have worker cooperatives. Towards this end, by the way, I should say that we also have German works councils, co-determination, where workers take on some kind of responsibility for the running of the firm or for decision making. And then we have worker cooperatives, where workers both control the firm and make decisions as well, collectively, democratically. And this is leading towards now workers' control, right? We can debate what that is later. There are three pathways for converting workplaces to cooperatives today. The first pathway is what we see in Latin America mostly, in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, but also in parts of Europe as well. There are these types of labor conflict conversions. In Italy, for example, in France, Spain, Croatia, Greece, Turkey, and these are places where workers are in conflict with managers or the state, but usually managers, and the business is in crisis. Usually the crisis is due to a severe macro and microeconomic crisis. Usually the workers have experienced some kind of grievance or some kind of severe exploitation. The workplace closes and the workers take them over. There's lots of conflict, usually occupation of firms. This is the Argentinian type mostly. In Italy, we can describe them as negotiated conversions because there's an ecosystem. They're legislated. And it's a social pact or an agreement between the state, workers, number one, the state, and cooperatives and unions. Worker buyouts fall into this because there is a legal and structural path to buying out firms. Then we have partial conversions, and these are all other types of transitions of workplaces where workers either own part of the firm but don't have control or say, or perhaps they have control but they don't own the firm. And employee share ownership plans is one example Yugoslavian self-management is another example. Also, in places like Quebec, workers can form a cooperative, say blue-collar workers, right, shop floor workers, and co-manage the workplace with managers or with owners as well. So these are the three types. I'm going to mostly deal with negotiated conversions today in Italy, because this is what distinguishes the Italian model. And then at the end, I will talk a bit about the labor conflict conversion of Argentina. Let me just say quickly something about cooperatives and worker cooperatives in particular, because most of these firms transition into worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives are universally accepted. It's a universally accepted model across the world for workers to control and own firms. They don't have to be small. The Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque are extremely large. They're a federation of many co-ops, and it itself has about 80,000 workers, about 40,000 members, extremely large. And by the way, also very capital intensive, in the co-ops in Mondragon create many parts for example, BMW, Audi, Rolls-Royce, and other infrastructure. So these are big companies sometimes, not mainly. Mainly the conversions are small and medium-sized enterprises. And so cooperatives this is where most of them are found, in the small and medium-sized enterprise sector around the world. So what is a worker buyout? This is what we're interested in today, because this is the most readily accessible form of workers controlling firms, taking over firms, controlling them. It both addresses the legal aspect, but also the worker control desire, right? So worker buyouts are a type of business conversion or restructuring where employees of a firm in trouble, so a firm that's in crisis or has succession issues that there's nobody to give the business to. So workers take it over, buy it out, usually buy it out. Generally, the employees will form what's called a new co. They will form a cooperative, and the assets of the former cooperative become part of the new co. Now, in practice, this is often just a transition of ownership, and they stay in the same firm. But sometimes they can start a new firm as well. They're a viable solution, we see from the evidence, and I'll show you, from unemployment, austerity, fleeing capital from local communities, and crises. And in particular, today, with the crises of businesses with COVID-19, this could be and is increasingly becoming a solution. Conversions to cooperatives are found around the world, but mainly in 6 countries. We have many of them. Most of them are in the world are in these 6 countries. 3 Southern European countries, Spain, France, and Italy, and Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, for different reasons. But that's where they reside. Much of this is a response to the worst effects of the neoliberalization of global capitalism, the transition of capitalism from one where workers were fairly secure in most industrialized countries and developing, soon-to-be industrialized countries in the 60s and 70s, and then because of neoliberal policies, increasingly their jobs and livelihoods were at risk. And so we see them in these countries where neoliberalism in particular had impacted the workforce particularly hard. So let me spend a little bit of time with Italy. Italy, like I said, are negotiated conversions, and they're mostly worker buyouts. This is Raviplast, an Italian firm in Ravenna, in the city of Ravenna in Emilia-Romagna. This is an actual photo of the inside of the firm. My work with Italian worker buyouts started in 2012, and I was a postdoctoral researcher at URICSE, the European Research Institute on Cooperatives and Social Enterprises. This is in Trento, in the Trentino Alto Adige region of Italy. And I worked with the cooperative movement in Italy, URICSE, and other researchers I led this project, and so the findings that I will show you are based on this project. You can download it as a report, the 200-page report from the Eurydice website, but you can also see a summary of the report in a recently published book called Cooperatives in the World of Work by the International Labor Organization. And I have a summary of this work in chapter 10 of that book as well. So in Italy, this negotiated form of conversion was really enhanced with what is in Italy a piece of legislation called Legge Marcora. And it's an institutionalized system of worker buyouts. Okay? But in Italy, we see workers taking over firms from the beginning of the 20th century. And then after World War II, in particular moments of socioeconomic turmoil. In the 70s and 80s, you saw many workplaces being taken over. This is before Legge Marcora was in effect. Okay? Legge Marcora becomes a law in 1985. This is much before. So there's already a history in Italy of workers converting workplaces to cooperatives. They started to emerge in the 70s and 80s because of the particular socioeconomic situation, the political economy of Italy at the time, and the world, oil shocks, and what's called the profit squeeze. That's workers were taking more and more of the wealth of companies, and business owners and shareholders were making less and less money. So it's what's called the profit squeeze. So there was lots of restructuring in the 70s. And in Italy, this happened in this way. The restructuring happened from downsizing and transferring industry from the traditional industrial heartland of Italy, which is the Northwest, Turin, Piemonte, the regions of Piedmont and Lombardia and Veneto, to the center and the south. And the transfer of businesses and industrial activity to Emilia-Romagna, to Tuscany, and Veneto and Lazio, and what increasingly has become known as the Made in Italy region of Italy. And I'll get into this in a minute. Lots of small and medium-sized enterprises in clusters. So in Parma, you have a lot of agricultural businesses there. Everything services dairy. That's why Parmesan cheese tends to emerge from there. In Ancona, it's leather goods. And this is how the Italian industrial economy is subdivided. The economy is subdivided. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention is you have a convergence of this moment with a really rich tradition of red, communist socialist trade unionism in Italy. So very militant trade unionism, and a very rich and left-leaning cooperative movement. So you have a combination of things that made this particular piece of legislation, institutionalization, and way of doing conversions, it made it a good enabling environment, as they say, or ecosystem. But interestingly, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it was a Christian Democrat, center-right politician named Giovanni Marcora who seized on this and said, he was also the industry minister. He seized on this situation and saw all these factors and said, maybe we can develop an Italian road to saving jobs and businesses in crisis and prevent further unemployment and recession. And he viewed this Italian way, or this third way between strictly private enterprise and public sector assistentialism, right? So welfare, as let's give more responsibilities to workers. So in many ways, you can consider this a new form of capitalism, right? That's one critique, right? It's another form of doing capitalism, right? So you get responsibilities to workers. But what it did do is it saved jobs, and it did save businesses, and it did save local economies. And so Marcora saw the best way to do this through the cooperative form, which was already established in Italy, and have that be a model from which to reorganize businesses so workers can be more in control and communities would be prevented from losing crucial enterprises. Marcora viewed this as the entrepreneurial possibilities of workers. So, autoimprenditorialità, you don't have to change. That's just literally in Italian what this is. This is the concept, right? And so the law was finally, he died. He proposed the law, and he died in 1983. The law came into effect in 1985 in Italy. It's called Legge Marcora, or Law 49, 1985. And it established a rich ecosystem for conversions to cooperatives. This Italian road taps into this history, strong regional embeddedness, that if you work in a small and medium-sized enterprise, in Reggio Emilia, or Bologna, or Imola, you will not leave. You will tend to, if you are a blue-collar, highly skilled worker in Italy, you tend to stay. And also it's rooted in Italian social traditions and family traditions. You will stay in your, there isn't much social, physical mobility in Italy, at least traditionally. So workers will stay where their family is. And so all of these things combined, to be able to enable and help this legislation, take effect. There's three guiding principles in this Legge Marcora model. Employees, and this is, I think, what you're interested in today. Number one, have a right of first refusal for buying out firms. So any firm in Italy that's not a public sector firm, if it is in crisis, or if the owner doesn't want to continue with the business, the workers can organize and buy out the firm. They have a right of first refusal. Even if the business is bankrupt, the workers can take it over and buy it out. This is ingrained in the legislation. The second principle is workers' own entrepreneurial initiative. This is what the principle that guides the law is based on, and their own resources, right? Including, and this is the other original contribution, and this is what makes it very robust for doing this, that workers, yes, can bring money from their savings and from their severance, but this is interesting, and this is really important, from their future unemployment insurance benefits. So the workers can say, up to 3 years, we want up to 3 years of our unemployment insurance. Give it to us now, and we will pool the money, and we'll use it to buy out the firm. Okay, that's a really crucial, so right of first refusal, and workers can actually use their unemployment insurance. So the state feels like we're investing in worker owners. So it's not taking away, because it's going to keep businesses and jobs in the communities. And then thirdly, saving jobs and productive capacity via the formation of cooperatives. And the idea is to minimize the burdens on the state budget. So Italy is not like Germany. Italy is a very centralized country. Germany's federal, like Canada. I'm in Canada right now, in Toronto. Italy is very centralized. So everything comes through Rome, and there's a national budget, and unemployment insurance it's all from taxes of Italian businesses and citizens. So to minimize, and Italy also has been going through many, many years, as you know, of austerity. It's a heavy indebted country. Its debt to GDP ratio is extremely high, one of the highest in the world. So the state wants solutions that will minimize how much it has to pay from its state coffers. And this is one way that the state says, this is a good way. We're investing in workers, and workers will pay back, because they'll keep on working and they'll pay taxes, right? And they'll keep the productive activity of local businesses happening. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time with this slide, because this gets into, well, I won't spend that much time, but this is the legislation in brief. So it's a negotiated piece of legislation. The conversions and the ecosystem is a negotiated conversion. It creates a negotiated conversion between workers, the cooperative movement, probably also the labor movement should be included there, and the Italian state, or the labor movement, is included with workers. Like I said, non-state workers in crisis, with businesses in crisis, can buy out the firm and convert them to cooperatives. They have a right of first refusal. They can use their savings, their severance, and their unemployment insurance. Secondly, and this is important, there is a rich financing ecosystem. And this is very important. You need to capitalize these firms because workers don't have a lot of money, even collectively, even from their unemployment insurance. So how do these conversions secure this? Two ways. From number one, from what's called a fondo mutualistico, or a mutualistic fund, a mutual fund, created by 3% of net income of all cooperatives in Italy. All cooperatives in Italy must give 3% of their net income to a fund that's then used to develop new cooperatives. This is also, it's practiced in Quebec, and it's practiced in France and Spain to a certain degree, but this was invented in Italy in essence. It was perfected in Italy. A lot of those funds go towards creating worker buyouts, because as soon as workers want to convert a firm to cooperative, they become affiliated to a cooperative federation. And these are managed by Italy's 5 cooperative federations, the largest one being Lega Coop. I'll get into that in a minute. Secondly, institutional investors. Italy changed its law, its cooperative law, to allow institutional investors to become temporary members of the cooperative. So in a worker cooperative, workers are members. That's the only members in worker cooperatives. In social cooperatives and in multi-stakeholder cooperatives, there can be multiple types of members, but usually investor members are not included. It's because you don't want cooperatives to be a speculative proposition. The point of cooperatives is that they're social organizations. So you don't want to speculate on co-ops. So Italy prevents this by putting some strict restrictions on dissolving a cooperative. In Italy, you literally can't dissolve a co-op. You can, but the money from a dissolved co-op does not go back to the members. So another way of preventing this is creating institutional investors that are temporary investors. They're members of the co-op temporarily. They invest money, and then they pull out after X amount of years. Thirdly, the Italian state, via Legge Marcora, and 2 funds that are facilitated. One is a soft loans fund of, this is called patient capital, right? Patient, it waits until it doesn't demand a return on investment quickly. So Foncoppet is the first set of bundle or set of funds for soft loans, and then share capital financing through these institutional financial investors. They invest in the firm and actually have a share of the firm, but never more than 50% ownership of the firm. So they can't dissolve the firm or do anything that the workers don't want to do. And the workers have 10 years to pay this off, right? The soft loans, the share capital, they have 10 years to show return on investment. This is all administered institutionally by a second-tier cooperative, a cooperative of cooperatives that's also co-owned by the Italian state, the Ministry of Economic Development, called Cooperazione Finanza Impresa, CFI. And CFI manages these funds and also contributes to business planning, transitioning the business to a cooperative, SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and so that type of business development work. Okay. The last big thing is the state contributes. The funds from the state is a 1-to-1 ratio from of the funds from workers. So if workers were to contribute 100,000 euro, or say 500,000 euro, the state can only contribute an additional 500,000 euro. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. This changed. It used to be 3-to-1 ratio. The state can contribute 3-to-1 and workers 1-to-1. And in 1995-96, this changed with Eurozone. The European Union said, no, you have to change this. This is unfair advantage, right? This uncompetitive practice. So the European Union forced the Italians legislation to change to 1-to-1. Anyway, you can blame Brussels for that. Okay. Okay, and here in these slides, I get more technical. And this is for you. I'm not going to get into this, but it gets into more technical detail into what the Legge Marcora is about. So legislation, patient capital, broader financial, the financial framework. So that's basically Legge Marcora. It tends to happen with businesses about 80% of the businesses, 90%, 80% are in crisis. So businesses that are closing or are bankrupt. And a lesser degree, about 20% with succession issues, downsizing. A business might want to downsize. So a group of instead of firing workers, the workers go and form a co-op and take part of the business with them. So and there are three types of cooperatives, three types of worker buyouts in Italy. There's the firms that emerge in crisis, like I said. So this is also a negotiated worker buyout. And these are 10 worker buyouts in Italy that I did case studies on in that report. You can look at some of the conversions through downloading my report and seeing the case studies. We did 10 case studies. The second group, smaller group, businesses that weren't in crisis, but the owner just doesn't want to anymore. And in the case of Arvizi and Reggio Emilia, very interesting. The worker sold the business to the owner sold the business to the workers, and the owner became an owner of the firm. Let me say that again. The owner sold the firm to the workers, and the owner became a member of the cooperative. So the owner is the ex-owner is now a member of the cooperative. Sorry. And then you have other types, not many of them, that are like Argentina, like I'm going to describe in about 5 minutes. So more companies in crisis and takeovers and more conflict-based. Most of the Legge Marcora worker co-ops are affiliated with Lega Co-op. It's the left-leaning, used to be a communist or communist socialist cooperative federation in Italy. That's not coincidental. So Lega Co-op works very closely with CFI and this Legge Marcora legislation. And this is just some slides showing the evolution of worker buyouts in Italy, and they tend to follow the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs of the Italian political economy. So as the GDP goes down, worker buyouts go up. As unemployment goes up, worker buyouts go up. Right? So it's a reaction, a response to the greater political economy. And in Italy, they've been going up because the Italian economy has been in seemingly constant crisis for about 20 years now, 20 to 30 years. The second political economic factor here is, I'm not familiar with Germany, but in Italy, the manufacturing sector, I'm sure it's the same in Germany. In Italy, the manufacturing sector is shrinking. So the ratio between new businesses and closing businesses is getting larger. So less businesses are forming and more businesses are closing, right? So that gap is getting wider and wider, and worker buyouts are a response to this as well. So in 1995, there were 640,000 new firms in the manufacturing sector. In 2013, there were less than 600,000. So a drop of 43,000 firms. The Italian manufacturing sector is shrinking because of competition from China, competition from India, Japan, and other places, and also because of its socioeconomic and political economic situation. And also, this is just the unemployment rate. As I said, follows the rate of unemployment. So these are responses to the greater issues in the political economy of a country. Worker buyout, there are about 290 that we've tracked in our database, and it continues to emergent. So we have tracked. These stats are based on between 270 to 290 worker buyouts, but they're probably around 320. Not all of them are controlled by CFI or are managed by CFI. Some of them happen because regions, different Italian regions, Sicily, Lombardy, Veneto, they have their own, they use the Legge Marcora, but they have their own mechanisms for developing it. So it's really hard to establish how many exactly, but there are about 320 probably. And they're across the Italian economy, but about 70% of them are in the manufacturing sector. So it shows you that it's mostly an industrial response. But we also find them in other sectors as well, services sector in that as well. There are also clusters of worker buyouts in Italy, and they tend to cluster in what I call the made in Italy regions of Italy. These are the exporting. These are where you buy your Parmesan cheese or where you buy your Italian shoes. It's all developed they're manufactured in what's called the Made in Italy regions. And that is in the small manufacturing sectors of Italy with business clusters, strong unionism, strong labor unions, many, many small businesses. So the average size of businesses are 4 workers. Interestingly, so micro businesses, but very interesting that worker buyouts tend to be larger, about 36 to 40 workers in Italy. So you seem to need a group of workers to come together collectively, to pool resources, right? And they're found mostly especially in Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany. And in this corridor between Parma, Bologna, and that kind of corridor, a corridor with many hundreds of thousands of small micro businesses and small and medium-sized enterprises. Also, in the Veneto region, and most of the metal shops that are worker buyouts are in the Veneto. It is a heavy steel industry. In Umbria, in Ancona, in Le Marche, and in the service sector, mostly in Milano and Rome. And this is just to say that I won't get into the details, but they last longer than traditional conventional firms of the same size. That is, once they become a worker buyout, a worker cooperative, they will last longer. Most businesses close within 2 years. Right? The first 2 years are very difficult for startups. But for worker buyouts, for various reasons, they tend to begin to shut down at 8 years if they shut down. If they survive past 8 years, they will survive probably 30 years. That's what our research found. Okay, so they last long and they keep jobs. I'll go through these really quickly. They're strongly democratic organizations. Workers participate more in them. They've been able to ride out the crises longer than most conventional Italian businesses. Most of them have somewhat improved. These are from a survey that we did of the worker buyouts that we researched. But interesting will be this COVID-19 crisis. This COVID-19 crisis is particularly hitting hard the cooperative sector and small and medium-sized enterprises in Italy for obvious reasons. There's an estimate that there's a 72% of reduction in activity in Italian small and medium-sized firms and the cooperative sector, including worker buyouts. And half of them claim that if the lockout continues, they won't be able to open again. So we will see now the Italian state with CFI, this institutional investor, has committed 44 million euro over the next few months to supporting already established worker buyouts and to creating new worker buyouts, especially in the Italian South that's been particularly hit hard. And these are some other factors. They're robust firms, they're more democratic firms, and there's much inter-cooperative solidarity between workers in the firms, and they quickly find networks of solidarity and business with other cooperatives and other firms as well. These are some of the tendencies that we found in it. So these are the general lessons that we learned from worker buyouts in Italy. And they're also reflective of worker buyouts in other parts of the world. And I kind of went through them. Most of them happen in small and medium-sized firms with low capitalization. And so low capitalization, but heavy skill sets, lots of skills. So skill-rich types of work, but not necessarily. There are worker buyouts in Italy like Phoenix Pharma. It's a pharmaceutical company. Raviplast, Fondiera Dante, Scalvenzi, Italcables. These are all large firms. These are all larger than the 40, and they're capital intensive. But they tend to emerge in small and medium-sized firms where the solidarity and the relationship between workers is well known. This is a very important factor. The social dynamic between the workers has to be very strong. And this is the role of unions as well. Unions can help foster this inter-worker solidarity in firms to secure the longevity of the firm once it's bought out. And the last point is very important. For this to be a movement, And this is a contradiction, I understand, because in many ways workers, the interests of the state and capital are against the interests of workers and unions, which is why we need unions. However, what we learned from Argentina and Italy is that unions can help other workers' organizations articulate legislation and create an enabling environment that facilitates the good working conditions and the long-term survivability of these firms. There also has to be some sort of a relationship that emerges between new worker buyouts and the cooperative sector as well, and the older union movement. And sometimes there's even social accompaniment by social movements. And this brings us to Argentina. And I'm going to briefly, I don't have much time because I know there's questions and I want to spend about 5 minutes with this. But this is where a lot of my work has happened as well. And I started researching this. I am from Argentina. I was born in Argentina. I am a Italo-Argentinian Canadian. My background is Italian. I immigrated to Canada when I was 5 with my family, and but I do work in the three countries, and I speak Italian, Spanish, and English. Not German. I'm sorry. But this is an example of labor conflict. Empresas recuperadas, these are recuperated enterprises, labor conflict, usually not worker buyouts. And I document it in my new book, which came out this year, called Workers Management in Argentina. And there it's very much and I document this in my book, it's a reaction to the heavy neoliberalization of a somewhat developing industrialized country, with a strong working class. And this is the one response was workers taking over workplaces to cooperatives. There's about 400 of them. So there are more worker-recuperated enterprises in Argentina. These are the labor conflict examples. So they're not worker buyouts. Workers take them over. And then they have negotiated with the state in many ways to transform laws, to then transition the ownership from the previous owner that often fraudulently bankrupted the firms in the height of high neoliberal crisis around the turn of the millennium. So around 2001, when Argentina experienced a financial crisis. So you combine a militant working class, a strong union and cooperative movement, and an economy that's collapsing. This is what you had. So the peak, you see the peak here in 2001, extreme drop in GDP and extreme rise in empresas recuperadas, worker-recuperated enterprises. Emulating the same, so paralleling the same findings we found in Italy. When the GDP goes down, in places where there's a strong enabling environment and tradition, worker buyouts and worker-recuperated enterprises both will go up. They're present across the Argentinian political economy and economic urban economy, and also like Italy, they're also in the manufacturing sector. And these are the sectors that traditionally in labor unions had the strongest and most militant unions. The first unions emerged in manufacturing, and the most militant unions around the world, but especially in Italy and Argentina, emerged in these sectors. And it's not coincidental that we also find these types of conversions, more militant, more crisis-riddled conversions occurring in these sectors. So metallurgical sector, foodstuffs, printing and publishing in Argentina has a strong union movement, and textiles. And they're found across the national territory. Not necessarily, they're clustered in Buenos Aires, which is the industrial heartland of Italy, and also Rosario and Córdoba, two other cities that are the second and third largest cities in Argentina. The political economy follows, like I said, the collapse of the Argentinian political economy due to the collapse of the neoliberal system and the exiting of capital and the rise of unemployment in the turn of the millennium, late 90s and early 2000s. There was a confluence in Argentina of different social movements, unemployed workers organizing, popular assemblies, alternative currencies. When the whole capitalist system, in essence, collapsed, these new and emergent systems of economic democracy emerged, the empresas recuperadas being one of them. They take on a slogan of occupy, resist, produce. In this kind of occupy, you occupy the plant, you resist, and you produce. And this is the stage of takeovers in Argentina. And I'm just going to close with this because we don't have much time. There are other slides that I get into that you can read on your own. I'll just close with this. That in Argentina, there wasn't this kind of top-down approach. There was no politician that envisioned a Legge Marcora. It was the workers invented this way of doing it, right? And by doing so, and this is from a long tradition of union democracy and taking over spaces in the Argentinian labor movement. So that's where they draw this tradition from. But then when they become co-ops, they have to learn how to be cooperators. They have to learn how to restart production. They have to, where do you get financing and capitalization? Most of these firms were bankrupt, so weren't receiving money. The workers weren't receiving their salaries anymore. So what happens then? So the workers themselves, they formed para-union umbrella organizations. And they started lobbying the state. And they lobbied the state around 4 areas. Changing and transforming business legislation, bankruptcy legislation, expropriation law, and cooperative laws. The most important one, the 2 most important ones here are expropriation. So they managed to convince sympathetic politicians in local legislatures to expropriate these businesses on behalf of workers. So the state expropriates it, gives it to workers, and workers have 20 years to pay back the state for the cost of the expropriation. Secondly, the workers managed to lobby the state, and under the previous government of Cristina Kirchner, she's now vice president of Argentina, but she was once president, there was a new bankruptcy law. And in this new bankruptcy law in 2011, there was this right of first refusal. So after this law, it was guaranteed in Argentina, like in Italy, that workers would have the right of first refusal for taking over businesses in crisis. And importantly, in Argentina, that if workers were owed money, so a lot of these debts from these bankrupt firms were because the owners couldn't pay the salaries, the biggest expense in any business. And so what the state said in this piece of legislation that was kind of co-written by workers themselves and sympathetic politicians was, okay, you take what the former owner owed you in salary, and you use that to buy out. So we use that towards the value of the firm. And so you basically erase the debt, some of the debts of the firm that the firm had through what you were owed in salaries. And I'll just end with this. Now what we have in Argentina is, again, a sympathetic government. So we had the government of Mauricio Macri, which is what actually it wasn't even center, it was a hard right government. They were not sympathetic to empresas recuperadas and other cooperatives. This new government of Alberto Fernandez is, and now you have leaders from the Worker-Recuperated Enterprises movement that have entered government and are now in the Ministry of Social Development and the Ministry of Production. And they are developing new legislation, a new registry of worker-recuperated enterprises, and a new law of recuperated productive entities that in many ways will probably emulate what we see in Italy with Legge Marcora. But this is it's there in the state, but it's still kind of a bottom-up initiative. So I'm going to end it there. I have a bit more, some more slides, but I'm going to end it there. And maybe we can talk, I will stop my slide, and we can field some questions. I have more slides, as you can see. I'll stop sharing here. And I get deeper into some of these issues, and you're free to read them, and the organizers of the conference will make them available to you. And you can email me and call me anytime. I'd be more than happy to help out in kind of discussing how this could happen in Germany, perhaps, and what unique dimensions to the German political economy and the industry and labor could maybe foster something similar in Germany. I understand that there have been some initiatives, some preliminary thinking that this is the reason why you're having this conference. So I'm really thrilled and very honored to be for you to have invited me and for me to share this with you. So.
Okay, can you hear me? Is it on?
Yes.
Ah,
yes.
all right. Yeah, thank you, Marcelo. There's an applause from the audience, and I'm going to show you some.
I can hear people.
Do you see some audience there?
What's up? This is Clemens.
Good.
Just a real quick question. It was always my impression that wasn't based on much knowledge of the topic at all, but that the intervention of the EU into the Marcora law was quite devastating. And, you know, it was that the potency of the law was very much impacted by that.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, very much
so.
so.
The numbers go down afterwards?
Yes. So in the 1980s, you see them, you know, the worker buyouts go up, right? And in the 90s, and in the early 90s too, and then in around 95, 94, 95, 96, 97, when the Eurozone was being debated and the different members, states were, you know, when it was all being created, it was decided that they looked at every member state's business legislation and business environment, and they decided that this was an anti-competitive practice in Italy. So there were no worker buyouts until about the early 2000s. And so what CFI did, this institutional investor that manages a lot of these, was they just managed the ones from the 80s. And they didn't invest in anything. So all the 90s was a lost opportunity. And businesses went under, the Italian manufacturing sector continued to shrink, and, you know, Italy's been in perpetual crisis. I mean, not necessarily because of this. It also impacted other areas of the Italian economy. And then they had to change from this 3-to-1 ratio investment, the state 3 to 1, 3-to-1 compared to the ratio compared to workers' investments. And then it was a 1-to-1, and then they started again emerging with the post-2000 in 2001 to 2007 they started to emerge. But then after the 2008 crisis, you see a big bump again, and partly because the Italian state reinvested, and partly because the cooperative movement also stepped up as well. So yes, the European Union's decision in the mid to late 90s was not very good for worker buyouts and the creation of cooperatives in general.
Thanks a lot.
And in recent years, and I spend chapter 2 of this report. Ironically, then Europe starts to look at conversions, Italy, how can this stimulate, how can we do worker buyouts in Belgium and other parts, and how can we, you know, kind of prop up the European economy through the strategy. And so they start seeing these reports emerging and these proposals for legislation in 2013, 2014, inspired by Italy. So, but nothing's happened at the European level yet. They've been all countrywide. I know Belgium's been working, so Spain, France, Italy, but Belgium, the Eastern European states have been looking at it. And I'm not sure where it's at in Germany. Anyway.
Nothing much going on here. In that respect.
They seem to be, Europe shoots itself in the foot, as we say in English, right? Often.
Well, thanks a lot, man.
Okay.
I'm just going to give this back.
So I take over, and it's quite strange here. I'm sitting in front of this laptop. Is there anybody else asking a question? Will jemand anders eine Frage stellen? Raphael, dann komm doch mal hierher, weil sonst ist das schräg. Dann hört er dich, aber sieht dich nicht. Raphael has having another question.
Hey, Marcelo.
Hi,
Lars.
Good to finally see you.
Yeah, maybe you could just, I think you touched that already in your talk, but maybe you can say what happens to the debts of any companies, like if they go bankrupt, do the workers who take the company over by the right of first refusal, do they have to pay them back, or are they erased, or how does that exactly work?
Yeah, the debts, well, the first debts are to the workers. right? And so both in Argentina and Italy, this new legislation says that workers' salaries have to be paid back. But then the other innovative thing here is that I didn't quite mention this, but workers' owed salaries can be used towards the debt, right? But in essence, the creation of a new entity, this is why they create a new business. It's called a NewCo. It, in essence, erases the debts of the old business. In essence, the workers aren't responsible for it anymore. This is innovative too. This is an innovative model. But usually it doesn't get to the point where these workplaces are intervened before they, like, so the businesses that are in severe debt will have a harder time of doing this, right? Usually the intervention happens when most of these workplaces aren't in extreme debt situations. So there's assets to salvage, where maybe the workers take over half of the firm and the rest is used to pay back the debts. But so it depends. It's on a workplace by workplace basis. And this CFI, this kind of managing institutional investor, this organization, will actually manage this. So part of that analysis, the SWOT analysis and the business analysis, is how you deal with debts and stuff like that. So part of the funding also goes towards some of the debts get carried over, some of the debts don't. So it's a complicated process, but in general, the workers aren't responsible. In general, still, the debts have to be dealt with, but this is a lot of that money, that initial fusion, goes towards sorting all that out. It happens usually in Italy, they take about, it's a complicated answer, right? So usually in Italy, these take about 2 years. It's getting quicker, these conversions, but now some of them take less than a year, but usually about 2 years to happen. 18 months to 12 months, maybe now it's getting shorter. There's another scenario that I didn't mention, and that's worker buyouts are also used. And this is why you see a new cluster of them emerging in Sicily. These are the conversion of mafia assets, businesses that were owned by mafia, to community, to workers. And you see this in the province of Trapani and in Sicily, and in different parts of Sicily and in different parts of Southern Europe. And there, the state takes over, the state liquidates any kind of debt. Usually it's not really debt related, but it's because it's crime. And the workers create a new business. And then the state has to deal with the mafia. But so that's a situation where it's a slightly different situation. And in a succession model, in the model where there is no debt, then that's not a factor. But usually it's taken up in this kind of structuring phase. Yeah.
Oh, now you can hear me, Marcelo. Thanks a lot. Is that I think we're through at 7 p.m. Is it?
Yeah.
It's going to an end. Yeah.
Okay.
Stay in touch. I got a lot of more questions.
Yes.
I'll write you an email.
I want to just kind of leave with final things. Like for these to happen and flourish, there has to be a confluence of workers, cooperatives. So there has to be a consciousness. This is where unions can come in, right? Raising consciousness of workers that you can make it happen. Secondly, there has to be some sort of legislation facilitating. And thirdly, there has to be some kind of financing mechanism. And the thing for unions that unions can do is to lobby the state. And I guess in Germany, it would be the federal and state, your state legislators to actually put together funds and make the argument that this is much more affordable than paying unemployment insurance or than seeing massive amounts of people unemployed. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to leave you with those thoughts.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, nochmal einen Applaus für Marcelo Vieta.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Applause. Yeah, well, at the end it worked fine, the technique and all that stuff. So bye-bye.
Okay,
we keep in touch.
We will.
Greetings to Toronto. Stay safe and healthy, please.
Yeah. All of you too, stay safe too.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.